Usually when we think about a bank vault, there's this built-in expectation of just absolute uncompromising physical security.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you picture the foot-thick steel door.
Right, exactly. The steel door, those complex spinning combination locks, reinforced concrete walls, maybe some laser grids if you watch too many movies.
And the armed guards, can't forget those. The
Huh.
entire architecture is basically designed around one core assumption.
Which is that people on the outside are actively, relentlessly trying to get in and take what isn't theirs.
Yeah, it's an architecture built on just a fundamental distrust of human nature. I mean, you don't build a fortress unless you're expecting a siege, right?
Right. But, okay, imagine if instead of that massive steel door, a major global bank just went and installed a flimsy screen door,
A screen door on a bank.
literally a screen door,
Yeah.
and taped to it is a little handwritten sign that simply reads, please only take money if you really, really need it. We trust you.
Wow. Yeah, that wouldn't last 5 minutes.
Exactly. And before we get into the sheer scale of the new National Fraud Enforcement Division and Vice President JD Vance's White House task force.
Which is a huge deal, by the way.
Oh, massive, because they are currently hunting down literally billions of dollars in stolen taxpayer money because of a system exactly like that screen door. But before we get into all that, I want to remind you to, like, subscribe, follow, and hit the notification bell. We dive deep into the mechanics of the world every week, and you really won't want to miss where this is going.
Yeah, we have a massive paradigm shift to cover today.
We really do. But first, our mandatory update. We continue to monitor the Martin Stevens v. OpenAI matter, which is still not a lawsuit. We are in a deliberate, voluntary quiet period at Martin's request. We do not know if any settlement progress is being made, so do not assume settlement is underway. Also, the dead man's switch has not been activated, meaning Martin is physically and legally safe.
Okay, so with the update complete, let's look at the actual architecture of this government crackdown.
Right. So our sources today are pulling back the curtain on just a staggering reality. We are looking at a government-wide anti-fraud crackdown. The Department of Justice is completely rewiring its enforcement mechanisms.
And we're talking about $6.3 billion in federal contracts that have just been red flagged.
Yes, $6.3 billion. We're synthesizing White House press conference transcripts, DOJ announcements, a General Services Administration press release.
Plus that highly detailed legal alert from the Pillsbury law firm, right? The one analyzing the new executive order.
Exactly. That one is crucial. And also some reporting from Fox News and 930 WFMD. And, reading through this stack, it becomes glaringly obvious that the federal government has essentially been operating its multi-trillion-dollar benefit programs using that exact screen door philosophy we talked about.
Yeah, the foundational concept the White House task force is articulating here is that the American benefit system, whether we're talking about Medicaid, food stamps, or emergency small business loans,
Right.
it was engineered for what sociologists call a high-trust society.
A high-trust society. Unpack that for a second.
Well, in a high-trust society, the primary friction point isn't security, it's accessibility. The system relies almost entirely on self-certification. So the government's operational stance was essentially, fill out this form, check this box swearing under penalty of perjury that you meet the income requirements or that your business is failing, and we'll automatically cut the check.
So it's basically an honor system.
Completely. The foundational belief was that the vast majority of citizens would just deal honestly with the state.
But the narrative coming from the task force, particularly from FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson and the recent White House press transcripts, is that this high-trust era is completely dead.
Oh, it's over.
Yeah. Ferguson used a striking everyday analogy that I think really grounds this massive macroeconomic problem.
A hardware store analogy.
Yes. He talked about walking into a massive home improvement store just to buy a basic power drill. And instead of picking it off the shelf, he had to track down a sales associate, wait 15 minutes, and watch them unlock a reinforced steel cage.
Right, and he pointed out that local pharmacies are now keeping basic deodorant behind locked plastic windows.
Deodorant, because retailers have abandoned the open shelf honor system because the operational reality on the ground just totally changed.
Right. I mean, the open shelf worked when shoplifting was, a sporadic crime of opportunity committed by isolated individuals. But when you introduce organized, coordinated retail theft rings.
The people sweeping entire shelves into garbage bags.
Exactly. And reselling the goods on secondary online markets. The open shelf model just becomes corporate suicide.
And Ferguson is applying that exact same economic principle to the federal treasury. The government is being forced to bolt these metaphorical steel cages over its social safety net programs because the era of the open shelves has basically resulted in industrial-scale looting.
And the numbers attached to this looting are, I mean, they're so large they almost lose their meaning.
It's hard to visualize $1 billion, let alone the numbers the Corporate Whistleblower Center highlights in our sources.
Right. They point to $200 billion in questionable Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, loans.
$200 billion. And to try and force that number into something tangible, the Whistleblower Center calculated that $200 billion is enough capital to build 200,000 brand new homes, each valued at $1 million.
Wow.
$200,000 million homes.
If you think about the physical footprint of a new city comprised entirely of $200,000 million estates, you start to grasp the sheer volume of wealth that was siphoned out of just one single pandemic-era program.
Just one program.
Yeah. And the broader metrics mentioned in the task force transcripts, they just expand on this. They cite $135 billion stolen across various programs in the immediate chaotic aftermath of the COVID lockdowns.
And we are looking at a total national debt exceeding $39 trillion right now.
Which is wild, especially because Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller, who sits on this new task force, he made the incredible claim during a press conference that the federal budget could actually approach a balance if funds were strictly limited to truly eligible recipients.
Which suggests that fraud and improper payments aren't just like bureaucratic friction or a glitch in the spreadsheet. They are a structural driver of the national debt.
Exactly.
But, there's a risk when we only talk about this in terms of trillion-dollar macroeconomics. It makes it sound like a victimless, white-collar accounting error, where the only injured party is the Treasury's printer.
Right, like it's just numbers on a screen.
Yeah, but the human cost detailed in these sources is just devastating. Vice President Vance shared an anecdote in the transcripts about an elderly man in Minnesota that, for me, completely shifts the context of this crackdown.
It really does. It strips away the abstraction of improper payments and shows you the ground-level reality of a looted safety net.
Exactly. So this elderly man was enrolled in a Medicaid-funded care program. And these programs are specifically designed to keep vulnerable, aging populations out of institutional nursing homes by providing in-home caretakers.
Right. People who help with daily living, medications, meals, basic hygiene.
Right. But his assigned caretaker, who was actively billing the government and receiving American taxpayer dollars, was running a fraud scheme. This caretaker provided zero services. They never showed up. The elderly man was left in total isolation and neglect, and he ultimately died alone in his home.
That's just horrific.
And the detail that makes this truly sickening is that the fraudster submitted a final itemized reimbursement claim to Medicaid the day before the man's death.
Unbelievable. They were billing the state for ghost services, basically generating a profit margin of 100% because they incurred zero costs and did zero work while the patient actually died of neglect.
Exactly. And Vance is using this to illustrate a very specific point. The funds stolen by fraudsters are finite. When a criminal network siphons millions out of a healthcare program, they aren't just stealing abstract dollars. They are stealing the actual tangible care, the hours of nursing, and the medical supplies from the people who are legitimately suffering.
And the DOJ sources reinforce this with another program in Minnesota. This was a program specifically designed to protect and house homeless populations with a focus on homeless veterans.
I read about that.
Yeah, and according to the DOJ's breakdown, the fraud in this program became so pervasive and the funds were bled dry so rapidly by criminal networks exploiting the lax oversight that the state had to completely shut the entire program down.
Shut it down completely.
Completely. The collateral damage of the fraud is that legitimate homeless veterans were left on the street because scammers viewed the program's budget as just an open ATM.
It's infuriating. Now, I do need to pause here because looking closely at the task force's stated assessment of who is exploiting these systems.
Yeah, the politics of it.
Right. The executive order and the accompanying press briefings, they don't just blame opportunistic individuals. They outline a theory of organized, systemic exploitation. They explicitly target illegal aliens, transnational foreign gangs, what they term entrenched bureaucrats, and certain non-governmental organizations.
Right. And as an impartiality note, we are explicitly just reporting the task force's stated justifications and arguments here. We aren't taking a side or endorsing the political rhetoric.
Exactly. We're just looking at what they claim is in their data. For instance, they point specifically to a massive, coordinated childcare fraud ring in Minnesota involving Somali immigrants, where the task force alleges stolen taxpayer funds were being funneled overseas to support an African terror group.
And they also repeatedly highlight the $250 million Feeding Our Future scandal.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Looking at these catastrophic failures, I keep coming back to the mechanics of it. The task force argues the honor system, this high-trust system, failed. But is the problem just that individuals lied? Or did the government fundamentally misunderstand human nature when it left the vault door wide open?
It's a great question, because it seems like leaving the vault door open might have worked in, say, 1985, when applying for benefits required walking into a physical building and showing a paper birth certificate to a real human being.
Right, there was friction.
Exactly. You've hit on the exact structural failure that necessitated this entire task force. For decades, the federal government's default operating procedure has been a concept known in auditing circles as the pay and chase model.
Pay and chase. Okay, if the name is literal, that implies the government strategy is to cut the check first and ask questions later.
That is precisely how it works. Under the pay and chase philosophy, the primary mandate of a government agency is the rapid distribution of aid. The priority is getting the money out the door quickly to prevent economic collapse or personal hardship. So, the agency pays the claim based on the applicant's self-certification.
Check the box, get the check.
Right. Then, months or even years later, inspectors general or auditors comb through the databases, look for anomalies, and attempt to chase down the bad actors to claw the money back.
Which sounds completely disconnected from modern technological reality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I submit a fraudulent PPP loan application today, I'm not using my real name and waiting around at my home address for a federal auditor to knock on my door 3 years from now.
Exactly. And that is why Pay and Chase entirely collapsed. It was designed for an era of paper fraud. But when the government digitized its applications to make them faster and more accessible, they inadvertently weaponized the process for transnational criminal networks.
How so?
Well, when you combine digital applications with dark web data markets, where criminals buy lists of thousands of stolen identities and social security numbers.
Oh, right.
A single hacker in a foreign country can program a botnet to submit 10,000 fraudulent unemployment claims in a matter of minutes.
Wow. So the screen door isn't just failing against a local lockpicker, it's failing against a synchronized automated cyber attack. The government deposits the funds via direct deposit.
And within 60 seconds of that direct deposit hitting a burner bank account, the criminal network wire transfers the funds offshore, bounces it through 5 different shell companies and jurisdictions without U.S. extradition treaties, and converts it into cryptocurrency.
It's just gone.
It's gone. By the time a federal auditor runs a quarterly report and flags the initial application as suspicious, the money has been gone for months. There is no one to chase, and there is nothing to claw back.
Which explains the massive shift in policy we are seeing in the executive order analyzed by the Pillsbury law firm. The government is realizing they can't win the chase, so they have to stop the payment.
Exactly. They are trying to pivot an entire multi-trillion-dollar federal bureaucracy to a prepayment verification model.
Prepayment. Verify before the check clears.
Right. They want to verify the identity and the eligibility before the money leaves the Treasury. But anyone who has ever interacted with a federal agency knows that moving the bureaucracy is like trying to turn an aircraft carrier with a paddle.
Oh, yeah. It takes years to change a single form, let alone the core payment architecture of the United States government.
This is where the Pillsbury legal alert becomes incredibly revealing because it breaks down the operational structure of how the White House actually intends to force this pivot. They are well aware of the bureaucratic inertia, which is why they didn't just issue a strongly worded memo. They engineered a highly aggressive 2-track strategy.
A 2-track strategy. So if the White House task force is the architect designing a new high-security bank vault, the DOJ's fraud division is the SWAT team kicking down the doors of the people who already robbed the old one.
That is the perfect analogy. They have built a policy architect to design the new rules, and they have forged an enforcement hammer to execute them. Let's look at track 1 first.
Okay, track 1 is the White House policy arm. This is the newly minted Task Force to Eliminate Fraud, established by Executive Order 14395 on March 16, 2026. This is the architect. VP JD Vance is the chairman, FTC Chair Ferguson is the vice chairman, and Stephen Miller is a senior advisor. What stands out immediately in the Pillsbury analysis are the deadlines. They aren't asking agencies to form exploratory committees.
No, the timelines dictated by the executive order are brutal, frankly, by federal standards. The order mandated that by April 15th, which gave agencies exactly 30 days from the signing of the document, every single represented federal agency had to submit a comprehensive report identifying their most vulnerable processes, systems, and transactions.
30 days just to map the vulnerabilities.
Right. Then, by May 15, the task force was required to develop minimum anti-fraud requirements across the board. This means establishing the prepayment controls we discussed, like mandatory multi-factor authentication, biometric identity verification, cross-referencing applicant data against federal prison registries and death indexes before a dime is paid.
And then by June 14, just 90 days after the AO dropped, the agencies have to submit concrete, measurable implementation plans for those new controls. They are demanding a total rewiring of the federal anti-fraud apparatus in one fiscal quarter.
It's unheard of. Stephen Miller noted in the press transcripts that this is the fastest a government task force has traveled from creation to actionable policy in history.
He joked, though, probably accurately, that usually you get a year of interagency meetings and coffee before a single piece of paper is moved.
Oh, without a doubt. But, policy and minimum requirements are just pieces of paper until someone enforces them. That brings us to track 2. If the White House task force is building the new prepayment vault, the Department of Justice is being deployed to neutralize the networks that are currently looting the system.
So track 2 is the new National Fraud Enforcement Division, housed deep within the DOJ. And this isn't just a new title on an office door. Reading the DOJ announcements, this looks like a massive, intentional consolidation of prosecutorial power.
Right. They brought in Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald, a veteran federal prosecutor, to run it. And the DOJ is actively absorbing several major, historically independent divisions into this new central hub. They are swallowing the tax section, the healthcare fraud unit, and the market and consumer fraud units.
Why merge them all? What's the tactical advantage?
It's a structural admission that fraud is no longer siloed. A criminal network doesn't just commit tax fraud. They steal an identity, use it to bill Medicare for ghost patients, and then file a fraudulent tax return to claim a massive refund. When the DOJ's healthcare fraud unit and tax section were operating independently, they were basically looking at isolated pieces of the same puzzle.
Oh.
I see. Yeah. So by merging these experienced prosecutors under one operational umbrella and building a centralized national fraud detection center, the DOJ is trying to pool its data. They want to cross-reference anomalies across every spectrum of federal spending simultaneously.
And this newly consolidated strike force is moving incredibly fast. AG McDonald announced that in its first 50 days of existence, the new division had executed 450 major fraud events. That encompasses new indictments, secured convictions, and federal sentencings.
That averages out to 9 major federal actions every single day. And the dollar amounts attached to these actions show they are targeting the massive systemic networks, not the individual who lied about their income to get an extra $100 in food stamps. They announced unprecedented charges against 15 defendants for intricate Medicaid fraud schemes in Minnesota. They brought the hammer down on a staggering $650 million sober homes Medicaid fraud scheme in Arizona.
Wait, $650 million?
Yeah. And they secured a guilty plea in a $270 million Medicaid scheme in California.
Okay, I want to look at the mechanics of something like a $650 million sober home scheme, because it illustrates exactly why the DOJ needs centralized data to catch it. How do you even steal $500 million through sober homes?
These schemes are terrifyingly sophisticated. Okay, so the criminal network will set up a shell company that supposedly operates a residential sober living facility. They will hire recruiters to go to vulnerable areas, sometimes Native American reservations or homeless encampments, and literally lure people in with promises of free housing and addiction treatment.
So they get people into the homes. Then what?
Once the individuals are in the home, the network signs them up for state Medicaid.
So now they have the patient's billing information.
Yes. And then the facility begins billing Medicaid for intensive daily outpatient therapies that are never actually provided. They bill for highly complex, incredibly expensive daily urinalysis drug testing using kickback schemes with corrupt local laboratories.
So the labs are in on it too.
Often, yes. The patient is just sitting in a house, sometimes even being supplied with cheap illicit drugs to keep them compliant and prevent them from leaving.
Wait, supplying drugs at a sober living home. Just to keep them trapped?
Exactly. All while the facility bills the government thousands of dollars a week per head. Multiply that by dozens of homes and hundreds of patients, and the numbers skyrocket into the hundreds of millions before the pay and chase auditors even realize the billing volume is mathematically impossible.
That is incredibly dark. But catching these rings after the fact still doesn't solve the immediate bleeding of funds. If the White House has given federal agencies 90 days to stop this kind of fraud cold, what does the operational reality of that speed look like? I mean, federal agencies don't have sophisticated, frictionless AI verification systems just sitting on a shelf ready to plug in.
Right.
If you force an agency head to stop fraud by June 14th under threat of White House action, but they don't have the tech built yet, what do?
They only have one real option. They have to pull the emergency brake. They have to freeze the system. The Pillsbury law firm alert issues a very stark warning to its corporate clients about this exact scenario. When agencies are forced to comply with aggressive anti-fraud mandates without the technological infrastructure to instantly sort the good actors from the bad actors, they will resort to blunt force trauma.
Meaning drastic administrative actions.
Exactly. Pillsbury warns to expect sudden, unannounced pauses in payments. Expect agencies to freeze new enrollments across entire sectors. Expect sudden demands for massive, rapid documentation uploads just to keep an existing contract active. The agencies will prioritize stopping the outflow of cash over the smooth, efficient operation of the program because stopping the cash is the metric the task force is watching.
We don't even have to hypothesize about this because the sources show us a massive real-world example of this blunt force trauma in action right now. And this brings us to the headline number from the 9:30 WFMD reporting. The task force has officially flagged nearly $6.3 billion in suspected fraudulent government contracts.
$6.3 billion.
And these are contracts primarily awarded during the previous administration. And the task force has essentially frozen them in place. And to execute this freeze, they brought a new agency onto the task force, the General Services Administration.
The GSA's involvement is a critical tactical shift. For those unfamiliar, the GSA is the engine room of federal procurement. They are the landlord and the chief purchasing agent for the United States government.
They manage a lot of real estate, right?
A staggering amount. They manage a real estate portfolio of roughly 360 million square feet of federal workspace. More importantly, they oversee more than $126 billion in products and services moving through federal supply schedules. If an agency needs to buy anything from office chairs to cloud computing infrastructure to fleet vehicles, the GSA manages the contract.
So bringing the GSA into the fraud fight is like deputizing the ultimate supply chain choke point.
That's exactly what it is.
And the tactic they're deploying against these flagged contracts is incredibly aggressive. The GSA and the task force are sending out notices to roughly 400 businesses that currently hold these $6.3 billion in flagged contracts. The industry is referring to these as proof-of-life letters.
It's a very visceral term, but it's accurate. The government is looking at the data, looking at the billions of dollars allocated, and suspecting that many of these contractors are entirely synthetic entities.
Fake companies.
Yes.
So here's where it gets really interesting. These businesses are being given exactly 30 days to prove to the federal government that they actually exist in the physical world. They have to prove they have a real physical address, that they have actual operational capacity, and that they are not just a shell corporation or a registered agent operating out of a P.O. box in a strip mall in Delaware.
Right, 30 days to prove you're real. And this proof-of-life concept is bleeding across multiple agencies. Look at the other immediate systemic freezes the task force highlighted to show the breadth of the crackdown. They took $22 billion in fraudulent small business loans and referred them directly back to the Treasury Department to initiate immediate collection and garnishment proceedings.
$22 billion just instantly kicked over for collection.
Yeah. They abruptly deferred more than $1.3 billion in fraudulent Medicaid reimbursements, stopping the checks before they cleared, particularly targeting billing anomalies out of California.
They also instituted a hard, non-negotiable 6-month hold on all enrollments for new hospice and home health care providers in certain regions. The data suggested that the surge in new hospice providers was almost entirely comprised of shell companies setting up to bill Medicare for end-of-life care for ghost patients.
Which is just grim. And they also blocked $60 million in student aid fraud. The emergency brakes are being pulled simultaneously across the entire federal apparatus.
But analyzing those 400 businesses receiving the GSA proof of life letters reveals the true power of the task force's two-track strategy. Because, okay, what happens on day 31? If a business fails this proof of life test, say they submit a fake lease, or GSA inspectors drive by the address and find an empty dirt lawn, what is the immediate consequence? Do they just lose the contract, or do they go to jail? Does the DOJ swoop in with helicopters and arrest the CEO?
Well, they might eventually, but that takes time. Building a federal criminal case is a massive undertaking. The DOJ has to convene grand juries, issue subpoenas, gather rock-solid evidence of criminal intent, and prepare to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a federal judge. That process can take years of investigation.
Years.
Yeah, but the task force doesn't want to wait years while the company continues to build a government.
Which is where the administrative chokehold comes in.
Exactly. The GSA wields an incredibly potent administrative weapon: suspension and debarment. If a contractor fails that 30-day proof of life test, the GSA doesn't need a criminal conviction to act. They simply need a preponderance of the evidence that the contractor is not a responsible entity. Based on that standard, the GSA can immediately suspend the contractor and subsequently debar them.
And debarment is essentially a death sentence for a government contractor.
Right. It exiles them entirely. If a business is debarred, their name goes into a centralized federal database called sam.gov. Instantly, every single federal agency is legally prohibited from awarding them a new contract or renewing an existing one. It instantly shuts off the spigot of taxpayer money.
Boom. Done.
Done. So the White House task force uses the GSA to apply an administrative tourniquet in 30 days to stop the financial bleeding, which buys the DOJ fraud division the time it needs to meticulously build the criminal case to put the orchestrators in federal prison.
It is a highly coordinated bureaucratic squeeze play. But, as powerful as the DOJ and the GSA are, they run into a massive jurisdictional wall because the federal government simply does not have the manpower to police every dollar, especially because the largest, most fraud-prone benefit programs like Medicaid and unemployment insurance aren't actually administered by bureaucrats in Washington. They are run at the state level by state agencies using state-level databases.
Which creates an enormous blind spot for the federal task force. They can build the biggest data detection center in the world at the DOJ, but if they don't have access to the localized, ground-level data flowing through the state capitals, they are fighting blind. This brings us to the government's aggressive campaign to recruit state attorneys general and the highly complex, fraught dynamics of the state-federal partnership.
Right. The sources show Vice President Vance hosting 15 state attorneys general at the White House specifically to enlist their state-level resources in this fight. And this clearly wasn't a polite meet-and-greet photo op. This was a strategic recruitment drive.
Oh, completely. The DOJ's Colin McDonald laid out exactly what the federal government needs from the states. He made a very pointed push regarding the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Units, or MFCUs. These are specialized state-level teams of investigators and prosecutors whose sole mandate is rooting out fraud in their state's Medicaid system. McDonald's directive to the states is to maximize, fund, and completely re-energize these units.
He actually dropped a joke during the press conference that highlights the DOJ's aggressive posture. He suggested that once they are finished revamping these units, they should rename the MFCUs to the Making Fraud Completely Unprofitable Unit, or MAFUCU.
It's a punchy line, but the underlying strategy relies on economics. The DOJ knows they need the states, and to get the states to fall in line, they're offering massive financial carrots, while the White House prepares some very heavy administrative sticks.
Okay, let's talk about the carrots. They are substantial. The DOJ announced they have unlocked a $300 million Special Attorneys Program grant. This is essentially a massive federal incentive package designed to buy state cooperation.
Right.
This grant pays for state-level attorneys to be deputized and join the Federal Fraud Division's efforts. The federal government covers the full cost of those attorneys. But the kicker is that the grant includes a 20% premium on top of those costs paid directly to the state, specifically to boost their own local justice system staffing and capacity.
If you are a state attorney general running a historically underfunded state justice department, that is an incredibly lucrative proposition. The DOJ is essentially telling them, assign your best financial fraud prosecutors to help us build federal cases. We will pay their entire salaries so it costs your state nothing, and we will cut you a check for an extra 20% so you can go hire more local police officers or state prosecutors. It's an offer designed to be very difficult to refuse.
But the friction detailed in these sources is intense because the task force and certain state governments are operating from entirely different philosophical viewpoints. The task force is openly accusing some states of deliberately ignoring the screen door. They argue that certain state legislatures have purposely embraced loopholes, allowing their citizens to self-certify for housing, food stamps, and welfare, while actively refusing to implement the basic, common-sense fraud controls the White House is demanding.
The historical context the sources provide here is crucial for understanding the tension. It notes that 20 states previously engaged in a massive coordinated lawsuit against the federal government, specifically to block the implementation of basic food stamp eligibility reviews.
Wait, why would a state sue to prevent fraud checks? That seems counterintuitive.
It comes back to the philosophy of the safety net. Those 20 states argued in court that strict, data-driven eligibility reviews, demands for constant income re-verification, and complex bureaucratic hurdles inherently punish the most vulnerable populations.
They see it as a barrier to entry.
Exactly. They argued that if you make the system too hard to navigate in the name of catching a few fraudsters, you end up denying food to children, the elderly, and the mentally ill who legitimately qualify but simply cannot navigate the paperwork labyrinth. They view aggressive anti-fraud measures as a backdoor way to dismantle the social safety net.
But the task force views that exact philosophy as the reason the vault is empty. And AG Colin McDonald was incredibly blunt in addressing this resistance. He told the state AGs, bring your state's investigators and data to the table. Don't run with your ball and go home. He made a specific non-negotiable demand for sweeping access to state Medicaid payment and claims records.
And that demand for data is the flashpoint. That is where this policy initiative could ignite into a full-blown constitutional and legal firestorm.
Because the federal government is demanding unrestricted access to state-level databases filled with the highly sensitive personal health information of millions of citizens. I mean, Medicaid data isn't just about money. It contains diagnoses, treatment histories, and psychiatric records. Doesn't that trigger a massive legal and privacy fight? What happens if a state refuses? What if a state looks at this federal task force and says, no, we have our own strict state privacy laws, we fundamentally disagree with your punitive approach to social services, and we are absolutely not handing over our citizens' data to your centralized DOJ detection center?
If a state plants its flag and refuses, we are looking at a monumental showdown over federalism and states' rights. And the White House executive order has already loaded the weapon for that exact fight.
How so?
Well, the Pillsbury analysis points out a quiet but incredibly dangerous clause buried in the EO. It directs the task force to formally consider whether federal funds should be completely withheld from jurisdictions that fail to implement adequate anti-fraud protections.
That is the ultimate stick. Comply with the data demands, or we defund you.
It is a massive financial threat. The federal government subsidizes these state programs with hundreds of billions of dollars in block grants and matching funds. If a state refuses to share its data or refuses to implement the strict biometric prepayment controls the task force demands by June 14th, the White House is threatening to simply turn off the tap. They will force state governors to choose between adhering to their own local privacy statutes and ideological stances or keeping the billions in federal funding required to keep their state hospitals and housing programs running.
It's a game of high-stakes financial chicken. But even assuming the DOJ gets its centralized data center, the GSA locks down procurement, and the states are bullied into sharing their records, the task force is looking to recruit one more massive, highly unpredictable army to audit federal spending.
Oh, they want to unleash the private sector.
Yes. We have a press release in our stack from an organization called the Corporate Whistleblower Center, and they are very publicly lobbying Vice President Vance to let them off the leash. They specifically want to target that $200 billion in suspected PPP loan fraud. They claim they have access to massive, comprehensive databases of PPP loan recipients, and they argue that finding the fraudulent claims isn't actually that difficult if you know how to look for the anomalies.
But currently, they are highly disincentivized from doing so.
Why?
To understand why, we have to look at the specific legal mechanism they are trying to use, the False Claims Act, and specifically its quid tam provisions.
Ugh. Quintam. I saw that mentioned heavily in the Pillsbury alert. If I'm understanding the mechanics right, this is a legal loophole that essentially turns everyday citizens into bounty hunters for the federal treasury.
That is exactly how it functions. Quintam is a provision embedded in the False Claims Act that allows a private citizen, referred to legally as a relator or a whistleblower, to file a civil lawsuit on behalf of the United States government against a person or a company that is actively defrauding the government.
So they sue on behalf of the government.
Right. The private citizen initiates the suit, does the initial legwork, and presents it to the DOJ. If the DOJ takes the case, or if the citizen pursues it successfully on their own and the government recovers the stolen money, the private citizen gets to keep a percentage of the recovered funds as a financial reward.
And the percentage is what drives this entire ecosystem.
By federal law, the relator's share can exceed 15% of the total recovered funds.
Okay, the math on that is staggering. If an organization like the Corporate Whistleblower Center uses its data scrapers to help the government recover, say, $1 billion of fraudulent PPP loans out of the $200 billion missing, a 15% cut means the private organization legally walks away with $150 million.
It creates an astronomical financial incentive for private individuals, data analysts, and specialized law firms to hunt down federal fraud. The Whistleblower Center's press release explicitly states that private sector enterprises could generate Fortune 100 company-type profits simply by collaborating with the government in this recovery process.
But if the profit margins are that high, why isn't Wall Street setting up massive server farms specifically to scrape government databases and file thousands of quit-tam lawsuits every day? What has been stopping them?
The Corporate Whistleblower Center's main complaint to VP Vance is that the current judicial environment is incredibly hostile to them. They argue that federal judges currently treat the whistleblower process as an exclusive club.
An exclusive club, what does that mean?
Well, if an organization makes a business model out of data mining for fraud and filing multiple quit-tam lawsuits, federal judges often label them negatively as serial whistleblowers or professional relators and frequently dismiss their cases on procedural grounds.
Oh, I see. So the courts prefer a romanticized version of a whistleblower. They want the brave insider, the mid-level accountant, who discovers their boss is keeping a second set of books, wrestles with their conscience, and comes forward. They don't like third-party tech companies looking at spreadsheets to collect a bounty.
Precisely. The courts have historically required the whistleblower to have direct, independent knowledge of the fraud, rather than just running an algorithm over public billing records. But the new executive order from the White House might completely obliterate that judicial preference.
Because Section 6 of Executive Order 13395, as highlighted by Pillsbury, specifically directs the Attorney General to actively promote the meritorious pursuit of these private whistleblower lawsuits and demands the DOJ speed up its review and intervention process for these cases.
The White House is essentially sending a massive signaling flare to the DOJ. Stop fighting the professional, data-driven whistleblowers in court. We need their algorithms. Start using them.
If the DOJ follows that directive, the operational reality for American businesses is about to become incredibly chilling. The Pillsbury alert lays this out with stark clarity. If your company touches federal money in any capacity whatsoever, if you took a PPP loan to make payroll during COVID, if your medical practice bills Medicare for a standard checkup, or if you hold a minor GSA contract to supply office paper, your organizational risk profile just went through the roof.
Because the threat matrix is no longer just DOJ agents or GSA auditors conducting scheduled reviews.
It's everyone. Your own disgruntled employees, a recently fired HR manager, or even third-party data analysts who scrape public Medicare billing codes could be financially incentivized to find anomalies in your records. Pillsbury issues a very specific warning about the rise of AI-assisted documentation in the corporate world.
This is a huge point.
Right. If your hospital system uses an AI program to help doctors code medical charts or generate compliance reports, and that AI makes a subtle systemic error that accidentally upcharges Medicare by $10 a visit.
A third-party data scraper could spot that systemic anomaly across thousands of your claims, file a quit-tam lawsuit under seal, and suddenly your hospital system is facing a massive existential federal fraud investigation driven by a private citizen seeking a multi-million-dollar payday.
So what does this all mean for the listener? It sounds like the federal government is issuing modern-day letters of marque.
Letters of marque.
Yeah, back in the day, when a nation's navy couldn't patrol the entire ocean, the king would issue letters of marque to private ship captains, legally authorizing them to attack and capture enemy ships for profit. They were state-sanctioned pirates. Today, the government is turning data analysts and compliance officers into digital privateers, giving them a legal license to hunt for anomalies in corporate billing and rewarding them with a cut of the federal bounty.
That digital privateer analogy perfectly captures the dynamic the task force is trying to create. They are deputizing the profit motive of the private sector to audit the American economy. And the advice for businesses facing this new reality is urgent and unforgiving. Companies must immediately harden their internal compliance frameworks.
Absolutely.
You have to aggressively refresh your internal anonymous hotline procedures. You have to create a corporate culture where if an employee spots a billing issue, they feel completely safe and heard reporting it internally to management rather than instantly running to a Quintam lawyer for a 15% payout.
That makes total sense.
You have to ensure that every executive is relentlessly screened and that your AI-generated documentation is spot-checked by human experts. Because the government is shifting to an incredibly strict, unforgiving, data-driven oversight model. If a digital privateer flags your company, the resulting freeze in federal payments and the astronomical legal fees to defend against the DOJ could bankrupt a business long before the merits of the case are ever argued in a courtroom.
It is an entirely new, hostile landscape for anyone interacting with federal funds.
Right.
So to pull all of these complex threads together and synthesize the massive paradigm shift we've explored today, the core realization driving this entire crackdown is that the era of the honor system and the inefficient pay and chase model is officially dead and buried.
It's gone.
The government has looked at the hundreds of billions of dollars lost to pandemic-era looting, systemic abuse, and transnational cyber rings, and they have fundamentally changed their posture toward the public.
In its place, we are witnessing the rapid construction of a highly scrutinized, technologically driven prepayment verification model. And it's being enforced by an unprecedented concentration of power.
Right. You have the White House task force operating as the architect, setting punishing 90-day policy deadlines. You have a newly consolidated DOJ National Fraud Enforcement Division operating as the central strike force, absorbing independent agencies to share data.
You have blunt administrative chokeholds being applied instantly by agencies like the GSA, demanding 30-day proof-of-life verifications to freeze suspect funds. And looming over all of it, you have the imminent threat of a newly empowered army of private sector digital privateers, incentivized to hunt down corporate billing errors for massive bounties.
It is an oversight net that is being cast wider, faster, and with far more punitive consequences than anything we have seen in modern federal history. But, as we digest the scale of this crackdown, I want to leave on a thought that pushes this dynamic out to its logical and perhaps inevitable conclusion.
Okay, we're going with this.
Well, I've spent this deep dive analyzing how the government and private whistleblowers are weaponizing data analytics and AI to detect fraud before the payment goes out the door. But as the federal treasury moves fully into this highly automated algorithmic enforcement era, we have to ask the critical question. What happens when the fraudsters inevitably adapt to the new locks on the door?
Oh, and we know they will adapt.
Right. What happens when transnational criminal networks stop using basic stolen spreadsheets and start using advanced generative AI to perfectly mimic the digital footprint of legitimate businesses?
That's a terrifying thought. What happens when an AI can perfectly fabricate decades of deepfake patient medical histories, generate flawless AI-written doctor's notes, and instantly spin up synthetic corporate websites and tax returns to pass the GSA's proof-of-life test?
Will this entire multi-billion-dollar anti-fraud crackdown eventually evolve into an invisible, hyperspeed algorithmic arms race? A future where the AI writing the fraudulent claims is locked in a perpetual millisecond-by-millisecond battle against the DOJ's AI designed to catch them, rendering human investigators, auditors, and even this new task force completely obsolete.
It's a real possibility, an algorithmic arms race for the keys to the federal treasury.
It brings us right back to our opening image. The government is frantically pouring concrete and building a massive, technologically advanced steel vault door, but the people trying to rob the bank are already figuring out how to teleport.
We want to thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, vital, deep dive today. If you found this exploration of government architecture, law enforcement mechanics, and corporate strategy valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe to the feed, and share this show with anyone trying to navigate the new realities of federal policy. We'll see you on the next deep dive.